Hi everyone, and welcome to the Art and Science of Fitness Programming 101, part number 4 on training technique, and this is class number 5 on improving, optimizing, and mastering technique for maximum training results. I am Brian Krall, your fitness instructor and personal trainer from Be Your Best Body Personal Training and True Life Development, Holistic Personal Development. And I have a really awesome class for you today that's going to really help you to improve your training to get the best results possible. But I know a lot of you out there are probably thinking to yourself, well, you already taught us all of the best exercises to do for hypertrophy and the best form to do them with back in part 3. So those were the best exercises in form. Why would we need to even improve upon them at all? And that is a very good question. Why can't you just do the same exact thing indefinitely, forever, for all eternity, and continue to see the same exact rate of growth forever? Wouldn't that just be great? Unfortunately, that is not how it works. As you should recall from the very beginning of the program, there's this thing called the law of diminishing returns that shows that when you do the same thing repeatedly, while you may get a lot of return on investment at first, eventually it is going to plateau. So you do need to find ways of changing it up and improving it in order to see the same growth more and more beyond that. And unfortunately, the human body is such that there are limits on the amount of weight that can be lifted. There is in fact a single strongest man in the world right now, and he is the strongest man in the world. That is a ceiling for the human race, and the ceiling for most other weightlifters when it comes to load, even if you're doing strength training, is going to be much lower than that, all right? We are very limited in how much we can load our exercises, even over the course of our lifetime. You may be able to train yourself to lift hundreds of pounds in your life, but eventually you're going to reach a point where you cannot lift anymore. And what's also interesting enough is that lifting heavy doesn't even matter that much for physical growth. That is why there's a difference between power lifters and bodybuilding physique competitors who are much more muscular in size. And the power lifters can sometimes even be skinny or fat, all right? So if you want to keep growing physically, or if you want to improve in your athletic skill set, you need to be focused on technique, not weight, and having an optimal form for hypertrophy and improving that technique over time and mastering it. And you also should recall the SRA curve that I illustrated for you at the beginning of the program. SRA, of course, standing for Stimulus Recovery Adaptation, and how when you introduce a stimulus to your body, it adapts and will make itself stronger, but then if it is not stimulated again soon enough, or with a heightened stimulus, it is going to fall back down to its original baseline, okay? Such is the nature of adaptations. Your body has to spend a lot of energy and resources making adaptations, so it is not going to keep them unless it absolutely has to, and is going to make it more and more difficult for you to build more and more adaptations on top of that one. So you'll find that while stimulating growth at first may be relatively easy, it will actually get harder and harder to stimulate further and further growth as time goes on. And in order to grow more and more, you have to do more and more technique-wise. Okay, so doing the same exercises with the same technique will unfortunately go stale over time, and your body will just get so used to it that it's no longer adapting and changing and growing from it. And this will happen to even good exercises. Even the best exercises done with optimal form and technique will go stale over time. So before I teach you about how to improve your technique, I'd like to start this class by first teaching you some preventative measures and why perfectly good exercises will go bad, or in other words, stale, and stop working over time. Because in order to really master and optimize form, we need to know what factors lead to its decay so that we can take preventative measures for them. And the first and foremost culprit that causes a good exercise to go bad and stop working is the adding of more and more weight, okay? The more weight you add, the more your form will start to get sloppy and will begin to break down, and over time will decay into a very suboptimal exercise where your body is acting more for efficiency than hypertrophy. So that's something you really have to be careful of as you do progressive overload and are adding more and more weight over time. And that leads me to number 2, which is the exercise becoming too mechanical, and you're not practicing enough awareness during it, which is something that happens with the mind, which is when we are first learning and practicing something, we're placing all of our awareness on it and are very conscious of what we are doing then. However, after we've learned something and practiced it a lot and gotten really used to doing it, it'll become almost like second nature to us, and the mental processes associated with it will become automated and subconscious. So you no longer pay very much attention to what you are doing. And the same thing happens with weightlifting. Once you become very used to an exercise, you may lose your awareness of all of the fine points of the technique and everything you are doing when when you are doing it, and it becomes more mechanical and about you just moving the weight from point A to point B so that you are not placing enough awareness on the target muscles, which results in them doing less work and experiencing less tension, and thus you are getting less hypertrophy out of it. So that's something you really have to try to be aware of and prevent, and that leads me to the next one, which is number 3. Another thing that accompanies the form breaking down and becoming too mechanical and more about efficiency, which is that your body will start to recruit other muscles besides the target muscles without you even realizing it. So when you are practicing something, your body makes neurological adaptations that are meant to make it do that thing more efficiently. And when it comes to weightlifting, it does that by recruiting other muscles besides the target muscle and using body language such as swinging and such to try to get it up in a way that is more energy efficient or ergonomical, and it's spreading out its use of energies more. So unless you are practicing good body awareness, your body will work to make the movements more energy efficient by recruiting other muscles. So you have to place your awareness on the target muscle, practice a good mind-muscle connection, make sure that the target muscles are the ones doing the work and not any muscles that aren't supposed to be doing the work. Next, another aspect of sloppy form that usually accompanies the breakdown of form is doing an exercise too fast. Once you've started moving so fast that your reps take less than 2 seconds each to do, you are moving too fast to be getting optimal hypertrophy. And what is happening is two things. Momentum is taking over on the concentric part of the movement, and once that weight gets going fast enough, your muscle's doing less work and the speed and momentum itself is doing more of the work to get it up. And then 2, you're dropping the weight back down on the eccentric and not getting hardly any tension there, okay? So you really have to watch out for moving too fast. It's okay to do your exercises fast, but there is a very fine line that you should not cross between fast and too fast, all right? Fast is highly optimal for hypertrophy and very hypertrophic, but too fast is suboptimal and not nearly as hypertrophic, okay? And this is something that will happen over time, is that as you get used to doing the exercises, you will stop keeping track of the speed as much, so that an exercise you might have started the training year doing slowly becomes fast by the end of the training year. That's what happened to me last year, and when I started my training year over this year, I decided to start with slow reps again and to knock the weight back from what I had been using quite significantly. And even after taking off 40 whole pounds for just about every lift, doing my reps slow with about a 6-second per rep speed was so intensely brutal. I was so surprised at how much harder it made the exercise when I was doing it slowly. So moving faster is something that your body does in order to spend less energy on the exercises. So while it's okay to go faster to the point of 2 seconds per rep, you do not want to cross that line. So you need to make sure you do not do your reps too fast. And the reason this is bad is because when you go too fast, especially with lower rep sets, you are not getting enough time under tension, okay? So there's not enough overall tension that your muscle is getting. And per exercise, your muscle should be getting about 45 seconds or more of time under tension. So make sure that your sets are slow enough so that you are getting that. And then the next thing that facilitates a breakdown of form and how optimal it is for hypertrophy is not using full range of motion. And this again happens when people get too used to an exercise and are just going through the motions, is that they will stop stretching out as much at the bottom or squeezing as much at the top, and it just becomes like that. So even though it doesn't look like a big difference between doing this and doing this, it is. When it comes down to it, especially the stretch is so much more hypertrophic than the rest of the exercise. And for some exercises where you can really get a good squeeze at the top, that has shown to be doubly hypertrophic. That's a study that I'm going to be referencing constantly in this program. So you need to get the full stretch and the full squeeze and make sure those are not getting cut out. All right, your exercises should have a full range of motion. And then the next thing is that you have lost control of your bar and the bar path that it follows, and have fallen into a suboptimal bar path without realizing it, which then turns the movement into a less optimal one. I see this all the time with rows. People will be taught to do their bent over rows properly by bending over until they're almost parallel and then pulling the bar up to their belly or rib cage to get a nice full contraction. But after a couple months, it's turned into them having their body at a 45-degree angle and flaring their elbows out and just pulling it straight up, right? No longer having that curved bar path like this, right? Pulling it more straight up to their nipples and probably not even going up all the way. So just that little change in the bar path, being pulled from here to here makes a huge difference. It turns the exercise less into a lat exercise and more into a rear delt exercise. Okay, so you've got to control your bar path and do not let it drift and turn into a suboptimal one. Next, another reason why people stop progressing with exercises is that they are not using high enough of a RPE, which stands for rate of perceived exertion. And that basically means that they are not pushing themselves hard enough. For instance, I know this big skinny guy who bench presses 2 80-pound dumbbells every single time he works out. It is always the same exact bench press. He is never pushing himself to use more weight than that or a more difficult technique or manipulating the training variables at all. Okay, so he's gotten complacent. He's not pushing himself to make more effort, to exert more force. So he's of course not seeing hypertrophy from that, all right? He's a pretty skinny guy. So you need to be pushing yourself and trying to make the exercise harder and harder over time, all right? And that leads me to the next point, which is that these people often have no progressive overload, all right? Even if they're adding weight, they may not be doing it systematically enough over a long term. Okay, progressive overload is supposed to be done over time. It doesn't just mean adding a plate to the bar here or there and not being methodical about making long-term progressive overload, which I'm not going to go too much into now because there's a whole part of this program dedicated to progressive overload. But what I will say about it now is that it doesn't just mean loading more and more weight on the bar, okay? Again, it means making the exercises harder by using more and more advanced techniques as time goes on, all right? However, you also need to know that when it comes to progressive overload, there is such a thing as doing too much too fast. Like I said, it is a long-term thing. And so that is another reason why good exercises actually go bad, is from people trying to progress with it, either weight-wise or technique-wise, too fast. So when a beginner starts trying to use an advanced technique, they probably aren't going to see any hypertrophy from it. Instead, they're probably going to get injured from it, all right, or at least very worn down, all right? It's going to be too much for their body to adapt to. And when you are adding too much weight to the bar too frequently, you are also either going to injure yourself, or at the very least, you will burn out and the exercise will stop causing hypertrophy and will start causing you more harm than good. So you do not want to be trying to progress too fast, because that will actually be self-defeating and will stunt your growth. But now the last thing that I want to say here is that no matter what the training variables at play or what techniques we are talking about, the main golden rule here is that doing the same thing for too long will eventually go stale and stop producing the same results. Now, the caveat there is that you also need to have been using that good technique for long enough. Okay, you don't want to stop using a technique when it is still working. Even if your progress has slowed down a little, which it will at times, this doesn't necessarily mean that that exercise has gone stale and that you should give it up, because it does take time and frequent practice for you to master a certain technique and see its full potential for growth. Here's the thing you need to know about SRA curves, is that different exercises and the stimulus that they provide cause different SRA curves with different lengths. So some exercises may have a bigger SRA curve, meaning that stimulus takes your body into a lower depletion and then takes it more time to recover and adapt. So some exercises and certain muscle groups may simply be slower when it comes to muscle growth. So sometimes we may need more stimulus, but sometimes we may just need more time and patience and to think more long term. And you really can't rush progress. So the first thing you should do if you think that your progress is not moving fast enough is not just jump to the conclusion that you've hit a plateau and you need to change everything, but you really want to look at what you've been doing and how you've been progressing and be tracking your progress over long term so that you will know if you've actually definitively hit a plateau or not, which is something that will take some time for you to be able to tell. So be patient and know that just because you're not getting rapid results out of every exercise doesn't mean that it's not actually working. It might just be a difficult exercise, which some exercises are much more difficult than others and thus take a lot longer to master. And it could also just be a stubborn body part, which many muscles are, and take a lot longer to develop and are a lot more difficult to do so and are a lot more painful to do so as well, such as the calves. So just because a muscle's not growing as fast as the others, or an exercise is taking more time for you to master and is more difficult, doesn't mean you should jump to the conclusion that you need to change up your training when it is in fact working, just not fast enough for your liking. So assuming that you have at least been practicing good technique for long enough, which will take about 6 months to a year, then you need variety. If you've been using good technique for at least 6 months and have seen your progress consistently slowing down or starting to plateau, then you know it is time for variety. So the name of the game is that you need some sort of variation and manipulation of your training variables and the techniques that you are employing in your training every 6 months or so. At the very least, every year, because over the course of a training year or so, even the best exercises with the best form will stop working.